G'day, guys. Welcome to Superchargers. I'm Daniel Thomas. Thank you so much for tuning in and your ongoing support. It sure means a heck of a lot. On this episode, I had an awesome chat with Jeanne Ratief. Jeanne has a PhD in international criminal and humanitarian law. She pivoted from that career and founded FIGGI Life and Beauty. She's also struggled with panic disorder, and Jeanne is very open in talking about that experience. Enjoy this one, guys. Let's get into it. You're from South Africa originally, and now you're living in Portugal.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how the expat experience is for you, because I'm also somebody who left Australia for London and ended up in Germany. And I have this kind of theory that once you leave home, there's no turning back. And I mean that in sort of a metaphorical sense, in that if you do go home, I mean, you can always go home to where you're from, but there's no turning back in the sense that you're never the same. So how has that experience been for you, like currently?
Well, this wasn't my first move to another country. I started young, just after I finished my um I don't know what would you call it internationally, but we call it candidate attorneyship. So it's kind of like your clerkship after you've done your law degree. And I left for the States. And I had a really hard time moving back to South Africa because it felt like I had changed, but everything else had stayed exactly the same. So I had a hard time with that. And I've always since then been ready to kind of go again. So I think when we moved to Portugal, um, it was easier for me because I had already done it once. But this time it was different because we landed in Portugal with all of our belongings a week before global lockdown for COVID. So we didn't have the normal experience of like immersing yourself in the culture, getting to know people, making friends, learning the language because we weren't allowed to go anywhere. Like on the flip side, it was amazing because we got to settle in and we got to kind of get comfortable in our new house. Um, but yeah, I think that was maybe the biggest challenge for me is the fact that we had moved again to another country and all the steps that I would have usually taken to try and get myself comfortable in this new environment, I wasn't able to take. So yeah, that was my personal experience.
That's classic. Yeah, what you said really resonates when you go home and you've changed so much, but everything else feels the same. That's the struggle, and I found it's sometimes often for close ones around you to understand that when you try and explain the nuances of leaving. But I've also darted back and forth a bit as well. I think once you get the kind of itchy fingers
Hmm.
to live in other cultures, but they inform us so much, these other cultures, and that's crazy that you were trying to transition to a new country when that all that was going on, because it kind of limits you, right, in terms of getting a foundation of like networks and friends. And
Yeah, for
yeah.
sure. And for me also, I think a larger part was kind of I felt like I lost a big part of my identity because when we moved to Portugal and obviously all of COVID happened, my expertise were international human rights and criminal law. So the type of projects that I worked on were almost 100% dependent on donor funding.
Mm.
And obviously, when COVID hit, donor funding stopped and projects stopped. Um, so, not it's not to sound vain or anything like that, but just to understand like you're shifting your reality from one country to another, from one culture to another, and you're trying to hold on to things that still feel true and known to you. And one of those things was who I was in my career. So I went from being like Dr. Jeanne on the podium with the president when we're declaring elections and everything like that to just Hof's wife because I had to give up all of that. Unfortunately, it was just so difficult during COVID. The Africa leg continued to grow and do good, but I was stuck here, so I couldn't be traveling back and forth, and I had to give that up. And that was a huge blow to me.
Mm, the identity thing. I
Yeah.
find it fascinating that you were doing humanitarian work, and then you still had a career pivot, because the issue with me and a lot of things we've spoken about on the show with career pivots and stuff is kind of burnout and things like that. But often, like, personally for me, it was when things weren't really aligned, they weren't doing anything greater good for the world. So I'm really interested to know, um, how did that pivot come about? Because essentially you were doing really important work.
Yeah, I look, my consultancy that I set up was really successful. It continues to be. I'm still a silent partner in it. I still do passion product projects for it, but um it was a hard decision to make because I had put everything into that consultancy. Like everybody told me this is a really dumb idea. Nobody starts a business in human rights, and it actually worked out so well. So to let go of that and to make that decision that, okay, this is not working, like I can't keep beating a dead horse, was very difficult. But I also was diagnosed with panic disorders 5 year prior, and I hadn't managed that very well at all, especially in that type of career. I was still constantly traveling. I was still constantly in issues where I was dealing with my own trauma and secondary trauma. Um, and at that point, also, when I had to make the decision to leave Calibrix, my consultancy, I just had a complete breaking of my panic disorder. So, from a health perspective, I also had to take a step back and think, okay, how am I going to navigate this? Because, I have a daughter, I have husband, I have goals and dreams for my future. I need to find a different way to use my talents that can bring me some sort of satisfaction while allowing me to figure out this path and how I navigate this anxious wiring.
Yeah, for sure. So what did that panic disorder or anxiety look like for you? It's something that it never goes away, right? It's how we manage it, and how we stop it, like taking the reins, and how we get that sort of control back.
Yeah, I think that the main thing is like, and this is how it's been explained to me, so I'm not trying to give like a medical diagnosis or something, but panic disorder is where many anxiety disorders and depression and so on could be genetic. Panic disorder is mostly triggered by complex post-traumatic stress. So you've had like very intense interpersonal trauma during your childhood and everything. And that creates triggers later in life that sends you into panic attacks. And then it's really about learning what your triggers are and trying to avoid them. But sometimes things that you don't even think would trigger you does trigger you. Um, and I think when people think about panic disorder, they think it's somebody who has panic attacks. And it's a lot more than that. Yes, you have panic attacks, but it affects every aspect of your life. So, for example, I have a lot of gut issues because the gut brain connection, when you're stressed, when you're anxious, it affects the gut. I'm prone to migraine attacks because when I don't sleep well, because I get insomnia, I get more stressed, I get migraine attacks. So it's a whole maintenance system. I have to stay in a good ecosystem. I have to have snacks with me so I don't get hungry. I have to exercise regularly. I have to look after my self-care. It really is like a daily thing that you have to take care of, um, and manage and learn to kind of just make the best of.
It's a complex integrative thing. It's the whole, there's so many elements to it. It's not a simple thing, like you
Mhm.
say. When I suffered anxiety, like it kind of took me by surprise. I was
Mm.
like kind of seemingly successful and well liked, and then all of a sudden I didn't know how I was going to like face the world. It was really, it's sort of like the rug gets pulled out from
Yeah.
underneath you. um
Yeah.
Yeah, so that integrative process, sort of staying out of the lion's mouth, like you say, I guess awareness is a big factor, right? Being aware of what those triggers are,
Yeah,
and
and that's a journey in itself, learning those triggers. And because not everybody's triggers are the same, but I'm curious when you saying that you had this experience with anxiety, did you also then feel like imposter syndrome like took center stage for you? Because that was one of my big things. Like I was in the mentorship space and helping people, and then all of a sudden I felt like, how can I be helping people and trying to motivate them when I'm struggling with anxiety? That's a huge part of why I was so ashamed of it and why I hid it for so long.
for sure, imposter syndrome is massive for me as an artist anyway.
Yeah.
But at that time, my anxiety was primarily because I was making myself too busy to avoid facing up to the things that I needed to.
Hmm.
So I was just doing far too much and avoiding the core of the things I needed to address. So my mental state and my body started to tell me that I needed to address things.
Mm.
Um, I wasn't sort of in a position of mentoring or anything at that time, but my story is a whole. I had to take a dramatic left turn, which is why I'm interested in your story, because it's similar in a way. Like my dramatic left turn was leaving Australia and leaving a career as well. And it's exact. I was doing important work too in architecture, just like
Yeah.
yourself. It wasn't like I burnt out in retail or something like that. I was, working on like environmentally sustainable architecture, but I was not aligned creatively, and my well-being was completely out of whack. And similar to what you said, I wasn't managing things well. I wasn't managing the way I'm kind of built. So I had to take a left turn as
Yeah.
well. Um, yeah. So that led you to sort of the skincare world.
Yeah, that was a huge left turn. I what really happened was that one of the major symptoms for me from my anxiety and my panic disorder is really sensitive skin. And your skin is your largest organ. If it's upset, you're upset. I just moved to a new country, and all of the things that had usually worked for me weren't available to me. Um, I don't know if you've ever had rooibos tea from South Africa.
Yeah, they have it here in Germany. Germany's huge on the teas. Germany
Yeah.
goes crazy on the teas. It's ridiculous.
So that's actually what all the skincare is formulated with, is South African rooibos extract, because it's got such amazing scientific evidence behind it to calm and soothe. And it was important to me that if I left my consultancy behind, I was leaving it behind for something that I could, one, use my skill sets on, and I could go back to school and do my advanced certificate in cosmetic chemistry, which I did. And two, I wanted to choose something to kind of commit my time to that would be equally as challenging. I didn't want to let go of one um, exciting, challenging job for a less challenging avenue, because I thought that would perhaps make me depressed or not as motivated. And that seemed pretty challenging to me. So I learned how to formulate, how to assess the ingredients. I was really a key part of that whole process. And it allowed me to step away from this kind of burden I placed on myself of what I thought I should look like and be like and act like to be able to fit into my old life or the legal profession, and just take ownership of my diagnosis and say, well, hey, this is who I am, this is how I'm wired, and I've created something for those of us who struggle, um, to just help you on your path a little bit.
Ownership's massive. Um,
Yeah.
so in terms of the skin care stuff, care, you have a brand, Figgy. Is it fair enough to
Yes.
call it a brand? Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know too much about that world. What are we not hearing about, and what's important in terms of like skincare and skincare products? Like, is it similar? I imagine it's similar to what we see in food in terms of there's complex labels and it's very
Mm,
hard to understand what's actually going on with the product.
yeah.
So, what are the main like issues there?
There are so many. I mean, for sensitive skincare, it's really about what's not in your product, like avoid fragrance. Most people don't know that you should avoid essential oils because when you don't have fragrance in your product, they put essential oils in for that sensory feeling, but it's very potent and it's from plant and fruit extracts, and that can be very irritating. But just from like a business perspective, I would say what people don't always understand is, and I'm not talking about big beauty companies, I'm talking about indie brands like myself, um, is how the pricing of that is kind of structured. You know, you see big pharma or big skincare brands bringing out these really low cost skincare that they say is it doesn't need to be that expensive. You can put these ingredients very simply in other packaging, which is true if you're producing on like hundreds of thousands of bottles per year or even more. But other than that, like there is a lot of costs that go into the product that are not just related to the actual formulation. And there's so much consumer information out there of what you should have in your product and what you shouldn't, what your packaging should be like, what you should do for the environment and what you shouldn't. And all of this influences the price because you can't put anything in a bottle that your clients won't buy because they don't feel it's environmentally friendly, but doing the environmentally friendly part is a lot more expensive per um, product than it would be to do it cheaper. So that increases the price. After COVID, shipping prices increase. That increases the price. Every single ingredient you put in that formula has to come from somewhere, has to ship from somewhere, has to be sent somewhere. That also increases. So there's so much that goes into the pricing, especially for an indie brand in a product, that one is not communicated to the consumer, and two is miscommunicated because they have this information of, you know, social influencers and Dr. Google telling them what they should and shouldn't be using. And then they think this is good for them when it really isn't, but they expect to see that on a label and it costs more to do that.
Yeah, wow, it's quite complicated once you
Yeah.
start going down those
Yeah.
down. But how much of your former experiences professionally informed what you're doing with the skincare range now?
I would say a lot because a lot of the skincare industry, if you do it right, is actually legal and regulatory. You can't just sell a skincare product. It has to go through all of our skincare is EU certified or licensed and registered. So it has to go through a process, a very intense process. Um, and that's all laws and regulations and legislation. And I mean, that's kind of my home field. So that was pretty easy for me to do that. And I also have a history in project management and the Prince 2 project management certification. So that helped me a lot with the logistics and the shipping and understanding what needs to happen when. Um, yeah, there's so much that goes into it behind the scenes. And then also like your agreements, you know, your agreements with other suppliers, with manufacturers, your tax obligations, all of this has kind of a foundation in legality or regulation. So I think that has assisted me immensely.
Hope you're enjoying the show. Quick shout out to Modern Mammals. These guys make a shampoo alternative for men. So if you're a dude out there and you want a product that leaves your hair feeling awesome, I can't recommend these guys enough. If you use the code 10DThomas, you get a 10% discount. And for any orders over 50 bucks, shipping worldwide is free. Back to the show. It's so awesome when previous careers or former life still inform us, because I think that there tends to sometimes be a bit of regret. You know, you can get caught in regret, like, oh, I wasted 10 years
Yeah.
and now I'm finally doing what I love. But when you realize that all those tools you were getting from other fields and areas start to inform what you're doing, it's awesome because no time is wasted, right? There's no
Yeah.
linear. I'm just a firm believer that that in this not so linear path where you go left and right in different directions, but they all inform and give you these tools for where you're at now, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and I feel that has also helped me a lot with my Anxious Calm offering, which is something that was born from FIGGI. And it's a community of for people like me struggling with anxiety and just trying to figure out how to peacefully coexist with it, not solve it or cure it. And I have online courses and a Think a Fix site that you can do the courses on. And that also came from my previous experience because in my human rights career, I did a lot of program development to especially the youth to teach them on voter education or life skills. And I always had to be very creative in my approach to it because I couldn't always, sometimes you work in countries where there's no literacy and you have to have a different way of communicating the message and bringing it home. And that's helped me a lot in writing these courses in this program because I've been doing it for so long and it's so kind of second nature to me. And one of the things that really frustrated me in my human rights career was how many times I was constantly being blocked by um, red tape, politics, diplomacy. If I take about all the amazing things that we put into place that could have really helped who it was supposed to be helping, that was stopped because of somebody's politics or some kind of red tape. It's just so frustrating. And now I get to make my own rules around that and really just help because I don't have to play to somebody else's political agenda or whatever is in their budget for this year. I can just focus on how I want to help and put it out there and do it in the best way I know how.
I love it because it's like the indie rock and roll approach of what you're doing. I always take that sort of punk rock
Yeah.
independent approach because you're right, it eliminates all that red tape and
Yeah.
roadblocks. But you mentioned coexist there in terms of the anxiety, and you're a mother as well, you're a parent. um it's quite challenging as a parent uh when we suffer anxiety. How do you go about managing that when you have a child to raise?
Well, it first and foremost is like the maintenance. You have to keep with the maintenance. But the second thing I've learned is that I'm very lucky. I have a very supportive partner. My husband is very supportive and he knows my triggers and he works with me if he sees something happening. But I learned quite early on that I know we always say kids pick up more than we think,
Mm,
but it's just better to be honest.
mhm.
Like you always think you shouldn't tell your kids something because you don't want to like cause them to have the same issues or stress them out about something they don't understand. But for me personally, I felt like it was having a worse impact on her seeing me go through something and she's not understanding what it is. So obviously, when I can and I'm able, I try not to have panic attacks in front of her. But you get something that you call the panic hangover, which comes after your panic attack, which can last any time from 3 days to 2 weeks, depending how bad the panic attack was. You're exhausted, you're fatigued, you're extremely depressed. It's hard to get out of bed. And obviously, she sees this. So I'm just honest with her and I just try to explain to her, look, we're all special and we all have our special gifts. And with those gifts, sometimes comes a price that we have to pay. And this is mommy's special gift. And sometimes I have to pay this price. Um, and I also try to just be honest with her in the time that it happens. So sometimes she would come to me for a hug and I just wouldn't be able to, but I'll tell her, listen, right now I can't, but you're so welcome to lie next to me and hold my hand or to color next to me, just to kind of give her that sense of she's still safe. I'm still there for her, but something is perhaps going on right now that's of a temporary time that's going to pass and then everything will be fine. And I think it helps her to also understand her emotions better and to give communication to her emotions, like I feel angry, or I feel sad, or I feel stressed. Okay, let's talk about that. I don't say that works for everybody, but that has certainly worked for me.
That's awesome. I couldn't agree with you more as a parent myself. The honesty and the kind of courage to be honest, because we sort of want to be the superhero parents for our
Mhm.
children. But like you say, if we're not honest about it, I think kids also have a tendency to blame themselves. So if they're left
Yeah.
to kind of try and figure out what's going on, they might just say it must be my fault. Whereas it's far better to say, hey, this is a normal part of life. I'm not having a great day today. It's not you, but also it's not your responsibility as the child to parent me, but I'm just making you aware. Um, I'm not the best today, and then they can work with that. They can understand it, and like you say, they can get an understanding of their own emotional life.
Yeah.
It's complicated. Like, there are sort of boundaries and stuff. It's complicated, but yeah, I think leaning into the honesty with kids, because they just, like you say, they have a knowing anyway. They have a real
Yeah.
radar.
Yeah, they do. And I feel like it's almost worse for me as somebody that struggles with anxiety to see my child having this kind of underlying anxiety because she doesn't understand what's going on, rather than be honest and try to explain the situation. But like you say, there is a line. I mean, I would never put it on her or make my problems her problems. It's just an understanding of where we're at the moment. It's temporary, and this too shall pass.
Yeah, yeah. This too shall pass is a big one. I have to
Yeah.
remind myself of that often. Um, Now I'm curious. It's a tradition on the show to have guests offer some kind of challenge to listeners. It can be absolutely anything. You know, I've had such an awesome range of like things that can help people just on a daily basis. It could be anything relative to your field or to our discussion. Is there anything that springs to mind?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I could give a challenge that I'm currently trying to do
Please.
myself.
Yeah.
So I've been on this healing journey from my past traumas, and I've come to a kind of a crossroads where I've realized that I really have an issue with expressing anger, because to me, anger is a very unhealthy emotion and it breeds very dangerous situations. And so I've always shied away from that. But obviously, things build up. And I've started to realize that, and I've made kind of like a social experiment looking around me, that people are not comfortable with naming their emotions. Like, it's fun to say, oh, I feel joyful. Oh, I feel happy. But if something really upsets you and you feel a little bit off that day, you're kind of reluctant to tell yourself or to admit to yourself, oh, I'm angry
Mm.
or I'm frustrated, because that's kind of a negative emotion, right? And you don't want to associate with that. So, my challenge for myself at the moment is like, when I'm feeling these feelings, to not only recognize that I'm feeling it, but to name that emotion and to understand where that emotion is coming from, and that all emotions are healthy in some way. Um, and I thought about this for a long time, and I've been looking around at people around me, and I've realized that it really is a bigger challenge than you think it is, because nobody wants to admit that they're irritated today or frustrated or angry, or it's just not a fun emotion to admit. So yeah, that's my challenge. Like, recognize when you're feeling something and name the emotion, and then deal with where that emotion is coming from.
That's massive. It's interesting you say that because anger's been coming up for me too, and I realized like I think anger is healthy.
Yeah.
Bitterness maybe not so much. If
Hmm.
you're bitter about something, I don't think that's a healthy. If you can't really compare emotions, but
Yeah.
bitterness is not so healthy. But anger is actually,
But repressed anger, I think, breeds bitterness,
yes,
because
exactly,
we're
exactly.
not dealing with it. So for me, at least.
Yes, and I heard someone say yesterday that depression sometimes can be anger turned within. It's
Yeah.
like if you're not expressing what you're angry about, that can
Mm-hmm.
then sort of morph into being depressed. And then you're
Mm-hmm.
like, well, okay, I'm depressed, but it's like, well, you're partly depressed because we haven't expressed the anger. And you're right, there's a negative connotation with it, and we have to learn how to like my response to it was to take walks.
Yeah.
I think that's a healthier response than,
Yeah.
shaking something. I've got ways of drumming and going to the gym and taking walks. Like that's how I deal with it. But exactly what you've said, I'm actually trying to allow it and know that that's okay, as opposed to like
Mhm.
squash it down. So that's a huge one.
Yeah. It's a difficult one, but I'm also trying to do it. So it's not like I'm suggesting it knowing that I've conquered it. I'm I'm desperately trying to conquer it.
It's an ongoing journey. There's no
Yes.
but yeah, I know I love that you said coexist before, because I think a lot of this, our flaws, it's about, how do we coexist with this stuff, as opposed to like,
Yeah, but also like I think that was a huge like stumbling block on my healing journey is all of the self-help and advice out there. There's so many tools about what you should do, how you should be positive, how you should be in the right mindset. And almost when you then ultimately fail, because when you have panic disorder and you're wired like this, you are going to have a panic attack again. It's going to happen. Like just accept it was a bad day. But when you have all of this messaging in your mind, you somehow feel that it was your fault. You didn't do the work. You didn't take the right steps. And the messaging will many times be, oh, I was where you were and I did this and I've never had a panic attack again. I've never been anxious again. And I just loathe that kind of messaging because I feel like it sets you up for failure. Um, and there's nothing wrong with anxiety. Like stress is a healthy emotion. It's if it goes too far where it becomes a problem, but it alerts us to things that are not right. So if you're just wired more anxiously, I believe that there are gifts in that, and that come with that. So rather learn how to give this a seat at the table on your own terms than trying to extricate it from your being because you need to be normal. Maybe this just is your normal.
and what's it telling you at that table? Like if it is a guest at the table, what's it trying to say to you, as opposed to kicking the guest out the door?
Yeah.
um I can go way off on these analogies. No, that's very cool. So where can people find you and Figgy, and what are you offering in terms of course? You mentioned the the community you have earlier. Where's all that?
Yeah, so you can just go to Doc Jeanne, Jeanne, JEANNE.com, and you'll find all of the Anxious Calm offering there. You'll find our online support community. And if you're interested in the skincare, you can just go to FIGGI Beauty, FIGGI.com, and you'll find all of the skincare there. And you can also check docjeanne.com for the latest news. We're having quite a few events in the States upcoming in the next couple of months if you want to come out and see us.
Cool. And just to bring it home, I'm curious, what now that you're out of this COVID time and you have this life in Portugal, what do you love? What do you love about, it's Lisbon, right? You're in,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
What do you?
we're actually in the countryside, about 40 kilometers outside of Lisbon. I would say I come from South Africa, so I just enjoy the safety and the tranquility I have here that I just did not have in South Africa. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of good security in South Africa. We have a lot of violent crime, and just being able to raise my little girl somewhere where I don't have to be constantly vigilant about something really horrifying happening to her is just such a gift. And I can't replace that for anything in the world.
Yeah, for sure. No, that safety, same. Germany is pretty safe too.
Yeah.
And yeah, I have that same vibe. What frustrates you?
I think maybe the food. My husband and I are huge foodies, and we love like a lot of flavorful food, and the Portuguese like to cook very bland food. I hope I'm not offending anybody. Their food, the fish is amazing and fresh, and they love cooking with fresh ingredients that is available at that moment, which is maybe something we do wrong because we buy ingredients from all over. But yeah, I miss the South African food.
For sure. No, I can really, I just think there's pros and cons to everywhere,
Yep.
right? And it's like nowhere's perfect. And, but I'm the same. Like Australia has a massive food restaurant culture. And
Yeah.
Germany, it's a lot of bread, a lot of bread.
Yes.
Like it's bread and cheese and bakeries.
Yes.
So, I don't blame Germany, but I've had like gluten issues and stuff. And it's just like,
Yeah.
there's awesome bread, but there's all this processed stuff in supermarkets as well.
Yeah.
Obviously I make my own choices, but no, I just find it interesting, the pros and cons um to all these places, because people might think, oh, you're living a kind of wonderful life, but it's always tricky to like build a life in a foreign country. It takes time.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's really a personal choice on how far you're willing to go on the pros and cons, like what outweighs what for you.
And your own values as well,
Yeah.
like what's important to you, and that thing about safety and security for children is,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
mass
that's a
it's
non-negotiable
it's a no
almost.
brain
Yeah.
it's a no brainer.
Yeah.
So yeah. No, well, I really appreciate your time. Is there anything we haven't covered, like perhaps for somebody who's like really struggling at the moment? Just, you know,
Well, I would say if you're really struggling with anxiety at the moment, you're not sure if you're having issues with anxiety and you need to go see maybe a therapist or a doctor, do that. But the thing that really helped me the most is to understand that there is a space between that initial overwhelming panicked breaking and recovery. And if you miss that space, you're going to be in a lot of false starts and false steps towards recovery. You have to kind of live in that space for a moment and get honest with yourself about where you are and recognizing where you are. And part of that is recognizing that maybe in this moment you're not okay. And that's okay. That's why you have people you can turn to, like therapists, counselors. But if you skip this space and if you skip this internal reflection, you're going to cause yourself so much heartache and frustration down the line.
and asking for help can be tough, but it's so
Yes.
important.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's why I have the Anxious Calm community as well. For those of us that don't have that support system, that don't know where to go, I monitor it so closely. There are so many rules about you can't network for business, no medical advice, no. It's really just a community for people like us struggling that just want to share, that have nowhere else to go, and maybe just want to say, I'm having a really bad day, and that's okay.
It's so awesome that these communities are out there now. Like, I mean, the internet's a bit of a beast, but it's awesome in this way as well, that all these resources were there. Because I think a long time ago it wasn't so readily spoken about, and the resources weren't there. So yeah, fully encourage people to find them and use them, like your community.
Thank you so much. I hope you find anxious calm there.
Thanks for tuning in. If you have a guest suggestion, please reach out on my website at danthomas.net. I am also on social media at Mr. Dan Thomas. Catch you on the next episode.